As I walk into the classroom, students can't help but recognize that, oh snap, there is a big black man walking into my class who's about to teach me math. And I don't have a lot of people like him.
Welcome to Reclaimed Personas. I'm Philippe Charles. In this podcast, I speak with Black folks building dynamic personal brands that center their identities. With the help of digital media, they're seizing control of their own professional narratives in their own voice.
My voice is more important than the notion of who I am. Reclaim personas. Reclaim personas.
In this episode of Reclaimed Personas, I speak with José Vilson. I'm sorry, the José Vilson. More on that later. He's a veteran educator, writer, speaker, activist, author, doctoral candidate, and the executive director of EduColor. He started his online persona back in the mid to late 2000s by blogging from the perspective of a Black male educator, sometimes challenging policy, sometimes advocating for culturally responsive education spaces. And he's still doing that now all across social media. In our conversation, we talked about him navigating his own Blackness as a Dominican Haitian American, and about how he incorporates hip hop into his communication style, and about how he doesn't really back down from some of the most controversial conversations in education. This is my interview with José Vilson. All right, José. So I want to go ahead and start just by you telling me a little bit about what you do, your career, what you've done, and what you're doing now.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate this. My name is José Vilson, Executive Director of EduColor, which is an organization that tries to mobilize educators of color and educators of conscience towards issues of social justice and race in education. And in addition, I'm also a full-time student at Teachers College Glover University studying sociology and education with a policy minor, and of course, longtime veteran educator and writer and so on and so forth. I think my career really started in the classroom. So after I graduated from Syracuse University with a degree in computer science, I quickly decided that I actually want to become a teacher so I could open more doors for students. And so through my 15-year career, I started to find ways that I could get my kids integrated into mathematics in the middle school level, and thereby trying to help them understand that they could achieve whatever they wanted to through that lens, and pushing them to get to high school, pushing them to get to college. And even if it wasn't college, it was going to be something even better than that, or whatever their dreams take them to, right? But ultimately, my path has been about ensuring that students and communities believe in themselves and have a firm belief that they can achieve whatever they want to. And so I've been blessed to elevate these voices in the ways that I do.
Yeah, well, that's awesome, first of all. And you know, thank you for doing that work. 'Cause we all know that it's very important work. And you mentioned EduColor. Can you tell me a little bit more about what the advocacy around EduColor is?
EduColor has been around for about 9 years now. We first started as just a clearinghouse for education diversity and quickly realized that practically every education conference and summit was white. And so we decided instead to pivot, especially in the midst of the Black Lives Matter movement, 5 for 15, and so many other social movements, to really try to get educators of all stripes to get a good sense of what it means to be culturally relevant and responsive, but not just responsive to cultures and language, but also to what was happening in the moment. As we know, education often lags behind so many other fields when it comes to any number of social movements. So we wanted to be those educators that said, no, actually, these are the things that we believe. We are values based, and we want to put this at the forefront. In our current iteration, we are moving towards nonprofit status, trying to institutionalize the notion that, yes, we need a great educator, specifically great educators of color, not just for our students of color, though unapologetically so, but also for our white students who also benefit, according to the research, by having a diversity of different experiences and races and cultures and languages that are given to them in front of them as mentors, as people who they can aspire to. And so, of course, we do this through community building, through building professional development, and through our advocacy work, whether in policy spaces or in research spaces or even in the classroom education spaces. So we try to be everywhere, and we're really a all volunteer group at this point, but hopefully we get closer to a point where we can actually have full-time staff. But we've been able to do a lot with a lot less.
Yeah, well, that's amazing. And I also, so I mean, I'm sure it helps from a experience standpoint that you are a veteran educator, but you actually said somewhere on your website, you said education has been a core part of your identity since you were young. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Like growing up, how is education part of your identity?
It's interesting because one of the things that people keep saying is that Black people, and I mean Black people more generatively, right? That we don't aspire to education. What I would argue is that education is in the top two issues that Black people care about, and it's not number two usually, to quote Beyonce. That is to say, I think we need to ensure that when we talk about children, even as young as I was at 5, 6 years old, we care about education and we care about it so much that we're willing to invest in institutions that frankly don't love us back in the same way, right? And so when we aspire to do well with our academics, as I did when I was younger, it isn't because we want it to be exceptional, it's because we want to be generative about how we learned. And so over time, when I was young, I learned that education was the thing that was going to get me not just like out of the hood, which a lot of people keep saying, like especially at our age. It was more about trying to find ways to make a better world around us. And so for me, I felt like when I was going through my education process, whether in public school for the first 8 years of my academic career or through private school, whatever that might look like, I always try to say to myself, okay, these are the things that are going to help me improve for myself. And then eventually, when I get to that point, I'll be able to help others in the ways that I do. And so I've been blessed to be able to achieve just that.
Yeah, and I can't ignore that you quoted Beyonce just then, and if you go through your sort of, I mean, as I have like gone through your social presence, like you are constantly quoting hip hop and quoting, I saw you quote Common and Jay-Z and others. Tell me about that. Tell me, like, that's a very interesting thing for an educator to be, you know, infusing hip hop into their everyday speech, it seems. So tell me a little bit about that. That seems like a part of your identity as well.
For those of us who grew up in a certain era, I mean, I was blessed because I grew up in like the golden age when, you had the KRS Ones, the Rakims and all that. But like when I really got into hip hop was actually, Notorious B.I.G., Tupac, like that era. And of course, my first record that I listened to that I actually like fully understood was, I think it was Award Tour by Tribe Called Quest. And so I gained a deep respect for why people saw rap as their education, even when schooling wasn't going well for them. And so, of course, over time, I said, this has to be part of my identity because I grew up in similar contexts. I understand some of the things that they're talking about. And do I agree with everything? No. But who cares? Like, what I cared about was how they were able to divulge lessons and talk about what was happening in the moment in time through lyric, through prose, through techniques that were often not afforded to so many of our people. And so I found hip hop to be a really good language for me to use when I wanted to make the connection between that which was knowledge from, I guess, from my sense or from my people, as opposed to like the academic knowledge where, you have like the big words and the Shafskis and the Shakespeare's and all these other different people that, everyone wants to say, oh, they're just so great. They're so great. Well, yeah, like, but I just heard Queen Latifah spit like this really dope bar in 16 is 16 lines that took this whole person like a whole book to say the same thing. So all that to say, like, I felt like there were different ways of doing knowledge that hip hop was able to speak to that frankly, like not just was doper. That's one. We could just name that. But then secondly, was able to very quickly connect whole hundreds, if not thousands of people together very quickly all at once through music, through prose. So in the ways that I incorporate it is because I'm trying to speak to that, to this idea that like I'm not gonna lose my sense of self because I know that there's knowledge outside of whatever institution that I'm in. And I'm able to say, okay, now that I have that, I walk into any space and I know I have probably a lot more knowledge than a lot of the people who are walking in, that I'm walking in with, because I have that hip hop behind me.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And then there's another piece of your identity that I ran into that resonates with me personally. And I'm gonna read this. I'm gonna read this excerpt because from a blog post you wrote, because I think this is really interesting. You said, after all, practically all my life, I never quite fit into the Black experience in America. As a Dominican Haitian American, I didn't have the big family reunions in the park, the knowledge of Haitian Creole that I would have liked to, or even the pride in my country that these groups are respectively known for. For the most part, I've been waltzing through the four cultures, Dominican, Haitian, Black American, American, just sampling each and feeling rejection at various points from all. When people ask me for my background, I tell them Dominican, Haitian, or Black will do, because that's what the question entails. But sometimes I wish planet Earth sufficed. I sometimes wonder about that too. So that was actually written a while ago, 2007. But
Yeah.
tell me more about that internal tension that you felt between those four, Dominican, Haitian, Black American, American.
Well, there's some things that are important to name. Number one is that my mother, who is as dark skinned as either of us, right? She grew up in Santo Domingo, which, if you ever go there, it is fully Black people. It is like 99% Black people, with maybe a sprinkling of folks who are just a little light skinned, right? And then she didn't understand herself to be Black or even African descendant. She just thought of herself as Dominican, which, there's been a big conversation around that over the last, I don't know, couple decades. And then with my father, who is Haitian, and the Haitian people definitely recognize themselves as Black. But I didn't grow up with him. I maybe saw him maybe once a year. And so I didn't quite understand where he was coming from with some of his own knowledges and how he approached life. And then, of course, as I was, traversing through life, I had friends who were of the African American experience who definitely had a connection to like long legacies, big family reunions, all these different things that like I wish I had growing up, because I didn't quite have that in the same way. What I understood what I understood then was how like all these different versions of what it meant to be Black, like actually made me who I am, surely. What I understand now is that like we don't all have to do the same thing, but we could all have this connective tissue that it doesn't necessarily have to be grounded in traumas, but can be grounded in like the joy through pain, as Imani Perry says. There's this notion that even I should be proud of the idea that there were Black people in Dominican Republic who, survived even with the intense white supremacy that swept the nation over the course of a century, if not two. Through, I can be proud of the Haitian independence movement and how that allowed for Haiti to find its independence. And they were the forebears of that long before like other Latin American countries decided to like hop on that boat too. All that's, and of course the African American experience, like I learned to be Black from the folks who were in this country as well. So there were ways that like I was trying to parse out and trying to piece all these things together in 2007 that now I fully understand. I'm like, no, actually, these folks are also part of my legacy too, because without them, there is no me. And so for me, I feel like, wow, like back then, I get it because I was going through a lot of personal stuff and trying to reckon with that. But now, like as a fully, full on Black man, I'm like, oh, like there's things that we most definitely need to go learn from and pick up from every single body so that we can actually get towards this thing we call a shared humanity. But we can't do that until we recognize that these differences are really important to us too.
Yeah, and I love that. And I mean, you actually speak something to, whether you know it or not, that a lot of, like myself, a lot of Haitian Americans, even if they don't have, you're Haitian and you're Dominican, but there's a lot of people who are, both my parents are Haitian, but because I was born here, I don't speak Creole that well. I can pick up some, and I can sort of jump in and out of conversations like hopscotch a little bit, or not hopscotch, double dutch a little bit, like come in, come out, but that's just my reality. And so I think that there's a lot of that, of people sort of struggling with that identity. I've certainly, I was born in Florida where there's a lot of Haitians, but moved to North Carolina where there's no Haitians, right?
Right.
And so I was very comfortable being Haitian, in North Carolina because there was nobody to check me. But, I come back to Florida and people are like, you don't speak Creole. You don't speak Creole well, So
Right.
I completely understand that. That's why that excerpt was so interesting to me. So I appreciate you expounding on that a little bit. But there are all
Especially
these.
by the name, I knew you were Haitian. I was like, yeah, he's Haitian, bro. Like, that's dope.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So we mentioned several now different parts of your identity. I'm sure there's a lot that a lot of other things that are part of who you are, and I'm sure we can't get into all of them. But what I am interested in is how you take these elements of your identity and how, specifically when you were a teacher, how did you bring that into the classroom?
It's interesting because there are so few Black teachers, as I'm sure you're well aware. I think this 2% of the entire teaching workforce in the country is Black male. That says a lot about not about who's interested in getting into the profession, but how people don't want us in the profession, right? And so, even so, when we do get into the profession, we're often asked not to be content specialists, but to be disciplinarians, or as I've said on many occasions, including the big policy spaces, overseers. And so, in my role as a teacher, I really wanted folks to understand that I was a content expert. That was my thing. And I was going to continue to be that person. But then as I walk into the classroom, students can't help but recognize that, oh, snap, there is a big Black man walking into my class who's about to teach me math. And I don't have a lot of people like him. But of
Yeah.
course, it's not enough for me to just be in my skin. I also have to do the things that ensure trust and ensure faith that I can deliver on the things that I say I'm going to do. Now, of course, was I perfect at that? No. However, one of the things that I kept instilling in people is that I did want to build a deep sense of relationship. I wanted to build a deep sense of connection and, of course, a deep belief that they can do it on their own without me, because once they left me, then there wasn't going to be perhaps another like me. And maybe that was a good thing. Maybe that was a bad thing. And in many cases that I've heard, that might have been a bad thing, but that's another question altogether. But that's all to say, right? Like, my identity was a conglomerate of lived experiences that you can't get if you're not who I am, right? And I think that's what people don't get when it comes to this conversation about diversifying the profession, is that Black men, much the way that we think about Black women, Latinx women, so on. You can keep going down the list, right? There are a set of experiences that white folks simply just don't have. And so, in order for you to get a more fruitful experience, especially for students who don't get that experience very often, it behooves us to get folks like me so that we can ensure that people see us not just as the deans and the overseers, but as people who can actually deliver knowledge so that they too can model that when they get older, when they become those folks. Because the things that I do, what I did in the classroom, it wasn't going to bear fruit at least for another 10 years, right? And so I had to wait that long in order to feel like, wow, I did a good job back then. And so I still feel that to this day, and I'm hoping more folks can catch that vibe. I mean, it's been 1,000+ students, and I think out of the 1,000+, I probably did a good job with 90% of them.
Well, that's actually a good segue because you mentioned, I think it was you did a TED, I guess a TED Ed talk, and in it you actually mentioned like even those kids who maybe didn't end up where you would have liked for them to end up, you still can feel like when they were in your classroom, you treated them as a human being. And then I put that next to what you said about, sometimes I wish planet Earth would suffice, talking about yourself. And to me, that's like, for yourself, you wanted people to see you as a human. And I'm looking at you say the same thing about how you wanted to be and how you wanted to treat your students as humans. And it seems like such a basic, simple thing, but do you see from your own experiences that tie like that that specifically was something that you wanted to make sure that you did for your students?
Generally, yeah. I mean, that's the hope, right? And actually, I would say 100% of the time, I wanted to make sure that students, even when I had to get into like serious mode, that people understood I was doing this because I felt like these were doors that were that needed to be opened for them, even if they didn't see it themselves right then and there, right? And so the things that I went through my own academic, I guess, journey. I started to see teachers who were great, and I would say the majority of them were really good to me, and also because my behavior is aligned to perhaps what they wanted to see as well, right? Like that's the thing that we don't talk about enough. But then there were teachers who unfortunately didn't see the same light that other teachers did. There were teachers who, were very dismissive, or they felt like I was trying to do something other than be the best student I could possibly be, or frankly, just didn't want me to succeed in the ways that I could have, simply because of what I look like, simply because of my phenotype, as opposed to saying, well, they have their own way of being brilliant, and so I have to acknowledge that. And so when I became a teacher, like teachers always say, well, the way that you teach is often reflective of the experience that you remember from your own studenting. Great. But then for me, I said, how can I be a reflective practitioner so that I don't repeat the same cycle, so that I can actually be
Ah,
that teacher who I really want to be? And so in this way, like when we say humanity, it isn't like all lives mattering the whole situation. It's more like I acknowledge you, not regardless of who you are, but because of who you are. And I know the experiences that you're going to get because, I have my kids who are super duper loud and expressive. And for them, I'm like, okay, but there's something really, really brilliant in there. And I'm going to tap into it. I'm going to sample it. There are kids who were super duper quiet and they were like, super meek. But then I also try to find ways to like gather what they were doing. And of course, there were, I get questions sometimes from I would say affluent white folks who, they say, well, oh, you worked in schools that are really, really hard. It must be really hard to work in those schools. I'm like, no, it ain't. It ain't that hard at all. Because like once you get past like those external behaviors and that dismissive stuff, you eventually get to the heart of the matter, which is like they actually want to do well, but they're struggling because of the things that they already came in with and the baggage they came in with. And so you have to find ways to dig deeper so you can get to that and harness that energy and build that energy and pull it out of them. Even students who have like so-called IEPs. Oh, this is a special ed student. Great. So then you figure out what it is that's on that paper that tells you what they're deficient at, and then get to the gifts because they really need you to elevate those so that they could do well for themselves, regardless of whatever that path is. You got to find that thing so that you can actually get to it and make them believe in themselves so they can do better for themselves.
yeah, that's deep. Um, so obviously this podcast is a little bit about you and your sort of digital persona as well. And I want
Yes,
to talk
sir.
about that. So, when let's talk first about like who do you see as your audience when you're posting things on Instagram or wherever it may be, or maybe it's different people for different channels. I don't know. Who do you see as your audience in general?
I mean, of course, every like channel has a different set of people I'm trying to reach. But what I've often found is like related to that quote I said before about education being at least in the top two issues. I like to think of my audience as education plus, like folks who may be interested in education in one way, shape, or form, and how that plays out in the classroom. And so, like, I try to write for folks who don't quite understand why it is that we're pressing on the things that we're pressing upon. Um, and of course, that hasn't always garnered me like the biggest audience. But of course, I'm a black man in education. So people are like, oh, he's going to talk about race. Yes, yes. But also, like, there's ways that I'm going to approach talking about this that try to like flatten what I understand about the classroom so that more people can tap into it. So if I go to LinkedIn, for example, it's a professional space. Great. So I'm going to focus on things that have to do with the teaching profession and the things that I'm studying currently about the teaching profession so that people can get more knowledge in that space. If I'm on Twitter or if I'm on, and I'm not calling it X, I'm calling it Twitter. Um, if I'm on Twitter, if I'm on Threads, I'm gonna say something like that's more related to the current event. So if there's I don't know, a conflict that has worldwide ramifications, I'm gonna talk about that from a perspective of an educator. Or if I'm on Facebook and they try to quiet me down on that, I'm like, okay, let me try to figure out how to make a video that is related to a theme that is connected to something that people can connect to, right? So, and of course, for my blog, like when I write something, it's because I have 1,000 words to say about something. And if I don't, then I'm not going to write about it. Maybe there was a point when I could like do that breakneck speed. But at this point, I'm like, I'll say something when I need to say something. And when I do, I would love for you to read it because it's something important. So long story short, like the audience has to be a little wider than that which you think is going to be the audience. It can't just be niche because that's not the way we work. Like Black folks don't work like that. We like to be like in different pockets and get a sense of what's happening out there. Good, because that should be the goal that we aspire to more generally.
Yeah. And one of the things that I really, I was, I guess, impressed by in your, with your digital presence is, I mean, one, you've been doing this for a while. This is not like a new thing, right? You've been, talking that talk for a while.
Facts.
And uh I mean, you broke down in one of your blogs, you were like, I was on MySpace in 2003, Facebook in 2004, LinkedIn 2007, Twitter in 2008. So early adopter. So why is it important for you to sort of jump on these social media trends early and these digital trends early?
when I when I was doing my degree in computer science at Syracuse University, I started to recognize that having a digital footprint was really important in terms of what was going to happen for the future. So there's this thing in the Afrofuturistic space where they talk about that there's going to be Black people in the future, surely, but then you got to start from somewhere. And those of us who were digital early adopters were always saying, okay, how are we going to help inform the space that we're in so that it allows for folks to be fully expressive in their own ways. And I think in my efforts, I tried to ensure that whatever space I got in, that I was able to carve out space, not just for myself, but for people who came after me who also had a way of being that they could step into it without feeling like they had to break some sort of barrier that it was already broken for them and they just had to stride through. And so, like when I hopped on Twitter, for example, it was pretty much by accident. I think I was Googling my name for some reason because I was trying to figure out like, what article was referring to me or something. And then I found out that like there was this white educator who like wondered when I was going to get on the platform. So then I did. But then when I got on the platform, I realized that there were no educators of color, like no Black, Latinx, Asian, none of that. Like we had nothing like that. So I said, okay, I need to get on this platform because it feels like this is going to be a space that's going to blow up where there's going to be more people who want to talk that talk. But I had to do it from the educational standpoint and from my racial standpoint, like mix all those pieces together. And I was there early on when Black Twitter was first popping off. I was there for education Twitter when it was first popping off. And I said, how am I going to be that person that marries the two? And so I think I did a lot of that early on to try to get people to understand that there are educators who are really about both spaces at the same time. And I think it allowed for the legacy that I've left in that space. But that's kind of the way that I try to approach all of this is like, if you don't inform this machine, if the machine will eventually like inform everything else. And we don't want that. We want to voice in whatever's happening.
Yeah, and I think it's important to say that you, I mean, you have a pretty large digital presence, but you're not just one of those people who just post on the internet. You wrote a book. You are out there speaking at conferences and that kind of thing. I saw something at South by, and so you're out there. So what came first, or did your digital platform or your in-person platform, or did they sort of evolve together, and how did they feed each other if that's the case?
They kind of informed each other, though a part of me wants to say that like I did the building of the internet presence first, only because what I'm thinking about is I used to have a blog on Zanga, which it had its own name, and like I didn't use my own name. I used like a different like nickname or whatever. But then one of my friends, Amber Cabral, who like just recently got into Essence as the top 40 of Power 40 faces, I was like, oh snap! Like you also did a big thing. I'm happy for you. So I'm
Yeah.
shouting her out right now. Yes, a Black woman as well. But um, she said, Jose, like, have you thought about writing a blog in your own name? And I said, okay, let me think about what that looks like. And sure enough, I started dabbling. And I like the first article I wrote was super like flat. And she's like, that's not it. Like, we need something a little different. And so I built my voice in the way that I did through all the blogging that I had done, like under my own name, but then I translated it to like, oh, you have to attach my name to it. And so of course I didn't just gain a rep, I also became notorious in the ways that I did. And in that notoriety, people asked me to speak at different places. They asked me to, be friends in different places. And so, like, a lot of the people who were in education research, for example, big names, mind you, they were like, what's a blog? And I was just like, this is what it is. And this is why people are so attracted to it. And it took them a while, but they started realizing how, like, the blog was the way for me to talk back at a time when the media was so focused on testing and more testing and trying to shut down schools. And this is the right way to do education reform. And me as a Black teacher being like, hold on a second. And so, yes, like, it had ramifications for my job and everything. But I think what my digital presence did was give people space to feel like they weren't by themselves in the ways they were thinking about it. I was just able to illustrate that for people who may not have been quite as attentive to our concerns and desires. And so, in that way, yeah, like, the internet stuff came first, and I needed to make a big presence because, oh, as an aside, when I Googled my name just before I wrote the josevilson.com, like, I found a bunch of Jose Vilsons, none of them in the United States, all of them in Brazil. I was like, oh, I'm happy for Brazil, but I gotta put my name on this. Like, I'm saying this through my whole chest. So that's where the Jose Vilson comes from. It comes from this notion that, like, I wanted to make a big splash, and the thing that I had to say was super duper important. And I hope more folks listen, not just to me, but to everybody else who comes after me. And so, in this way, yeah, like, we needed a big brand, big presence, and I was able to provide that in the ways that I did.
Yeah, you talked in one of your videos about taking up space, and when you say the Jose Vilson, that's what that makes me think of. Like, you were kind of claiming your space a little bit, and well, this is called Reclaim Personas, right? So that's very much what this podcast is about as well.
Yes, sir.
And you've talked a lot about, like, teacher voice. I've seen that. I've seen you bring that up. I've seen you talk about, there not being any celebrity educators really. Talk to me about that. Like, what is this teacher voice? I mean, you're creating your own, but why do you talk about teacher voice? Why do you know about teacher voice, but why do you tell other people about the importance of teacher voice? Why is that important?
At the time, it's most of it was because I kept finding slots where education was talked about, but not enough about what teachers were doing with their work at the time. Because when it comes down to it, if you wanted to see a policy enacted, you went to the teacher, and that's where you should go. But unfortunately, we weren't going there. We were going to the mayor. We were going to this researcher. We were going to this author. In many cases, we were going to, like, this actor, this musician, and, like, because we wanted to get more eyes on whatever issue it was. But we never actually went to the classroom experience. And let's just make a note here too. We rarely really ask students, right? And the only time that we ever asked teachers about anything was to say, like, oh, look how this policy worked. They're so cute and yada yada. As opposed to saying, no, actually, we are professionals, and here's the things. Here are the things that we know about what we're doing and why this work matters. And so I found that teacher voice, it needed to be elevated, because I found too often that we weren't hearing what teachers were saying from the classroom experience. I think at this point, we're very fortunate that more people are being intentional about pulling in more teachers. But what I often fear is that teachers are being given a script. Like, here's the thing you're going to say. And if you don't say it, then you're going to get in trouble, or you're not going to be able to get the spotlight again, or you're not going to get this award, or whatever have you. Like, you have to be super diplomatic about everything, as opposed to having a teacher who can actually keep it honest and say, like, here are the things that we're not seeing, and here are ways that we can improve policy so that I could do my job better. And so that's kind of what I mean with teacher voices, like, trying to pull in more folks to be thoughtful about having honest voices. And of course, super clear too. We need teachers who can also tell the story and be thoughtful about that and translate that to different audiences. But there's also something to be said about teachers who, can actually talk about that which happens in the classroom and translate that for different audiences.
Yeah, and you talked about teachers being, it seems like teachers these days are being handed a script of what to say. And when you were blogging, you very much went off script because you said that the NYC Department of Education, you blocked your blog from school system computers everywhere. Tell me about that. Like that was when I think that's probably when you were first getting started with the blogging thing. Is that right?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, it's quick. It's as I'm reminiscing about it, I got pretty hot pretty quick. Like in about 2 years span, I had maybe like a couple of people who were, reading my blog here and there. I was maybe hitting 1,000 views a day, just from the blogs I was posting. And there were some times when like it went to a couple thousand, a couple million. There was at some point in time where people were just like, oh, let me go check what he's saying. But I would say around 2009, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, of course, but like at 2009, I said, let me go check my website just to make sure everything is on the up and up because I got a text saying that like it was down. So I said, let me go check it. But I checked it in my at the school, and then I noticed, oh snap, I can't check it. Like it's blocked. Is it blocked just at the school? So I would text other people around DOE, and they would say like, oh no, your blog is blocked. It says this it was sexually explicit or something. I'm like, what are y'all talking about? Like, there's nothing happening with my blog that would suggest such things. And then I found out later on that, yeah, like my blog was blocked in every single DOE computer except in central offices, because then later on, I come to find out that every single superintendent and district leader was reading my blog on a regular basis, but some were reading it because they loved it, and others were reading it because they love to hate it. And I said, well, at least y'all feel something, and that's good. I mean, it came with a little pain, of course, but that because I was like, I'm earnestly trying to tell y'all what it is that you're missing. But then I also say, you know what? Okay, I'm glad that they care enough to read it. So I need to just flip that script and keep writing because that's what really mattered the most. And especially for folks who felt like they were ignored, this is going to be the thing that lets them feel like they're being heard in the ways that they should.
Yeah, and you, I mean, but I'm still like tripping over that because because now you talk so much about teacher voice, and you're sort of in this process of sort of developing your voice, and it's working. People are responding, people are reading it, and then you see sort of these attempts to suppress your voice. How do you respond to that? Like, what are you internally thinking through that process as you see that happen?
When I finally revealed to everybody that that's what was happening, the dynamic that was happening there, a lot of other districts also reported that my blog was blocked on their computers, and not because I was cussing or anything, but because like they just straight up like thought my voice was not, was to be blocked in that way. And then shortly thereafter, other blogs were also blocked. But I think I was the first in terms of folks who were doing this NYC education blogging, because NYC education blogging was known more for, trying to talk back to policy. And that mattered a lot for a lot of us. My internal process was, yes, anger, of course, and being like, oh, so y'all are going to block me. Oh, so that means I need to write some more, and I need to expose some more, and I need to keep tapping on people's shoulders. And I'm not trying to make y'all the villain, but now I'm going to say the thing even clearer than I said it before, and get through all this different stuff so you can see what it is and take and pick apart how y'all like do me, how y'all do students, how y'all do schools more generally, and just consistently pound the pavement. I think what I found over time though was that like because of my endurance, I was finally able to get into the spaces where I was able to influence media. For example, there were more news reports, that were actually more favorable finally to schools and the problems that were going on with schools because we kept pushing in the ways that we did. We finally got into the policy spaces. Like I've met a lot of the major like policymaker type folks, and those organizations, they were like, okay, we'll have him on and then he'll get to speak. And when I did, it was like, oh, so I just thought you were nuts, but in fact, like you were making sense. I'm like, okay, like that could be your feeling, but yes, I'm cool. Thank you for asking.
Yeah.
I think generally what I found was that it mattered that I endured, and I had to just keep pushing. And the book was evidence of that. So many other people who also are doing that, like big education type work are evidence of that. The fact that teacher diversity has now become one of the pillars of education policy spaces, I'm glad to have contributed in the ways that I did. And so, long story short, like it hurt for a while, and it made me nervous oftentimes, especially when it came to my job and how people felt like they could just outright dismiss me because I was getting more popular than them for whatever reason. But I think the fruits are there, like, and I think it's clear. So hopefully, I think it steeled my resolve. Like, I'm from the hood already, so that didn't bother me as much, but it made me even more resolved to ensure that my voice and others' voices were elevated.
You know, it's funny. When I was writing that question, what I thought you were gonna say is very similar. You just said, "I'm from the hood, so it didn't bother me," and I was thinking, I'm from New York.
Right.
Like, it didn't bother. That's what I was like. That's what he's gonna say. I know that's what he's gonna say. You said something very close, but I love that. Okay, but energy, yeah. And but here's the thing. So now that you have this, and that you know you're on Instagram and you know obviously Twitter, some of the spaces that we mentioned before, and you said this to me. You said you can't just go for a niche audience. You have to go a little bit bigger than the audience that you think you're going for, and yet in the education space, we know that a lot of the things, there's a lot of controversy. There's a lot of controversial topics, right? And so the people that you're trying to talk to is everybody. And yet, you have to talk about things like gun violence in schools. And you got to talk about things like critical race theory and, the banning of materials for students, right? Does that affect, do you think about, okay, how do I still reach this now broader audience? And how do I stay true to what I'm trying to say, but make sure everybody's listening?
I'll tell you a story. I went to Santa Fe, New Mexico. And if you know anything about Santa Fe, you know that it is a predominantly indigenous and Latinx population there. But the conference itself was predominantly white. And I won't name the conference, but I think they're pretty easy to figure out. Even the organizers themselves, for the most part, are also that. And so, like, I had a choice. Either I could keep it super flat and just talk about math, or I can talk about the issues that I need to talk about, given the hundreds of people who were going to be listening to me. And so, what I did was I talked about the issues. So, I explained what critical race theory was. I, of course, injected a few jokes there. I made fun of like the Fox Newses and all these other different spaces that kept trying to I guess take the narrative away from folks who were really about it. And then I said, this is what we need to do in order to move forward for real. And of course, there were audience members who said, he made me uncomfortable. And I said, okay, good. That's a good thing. But then the organizers came up to me and said, some of the organizers felt like you were talking about uncomfortable topics, but it almost felt like you were sitting next to them and having a conversation about it. And I think I appreciate that vibe now as I'm getting older. Is like, there are things that I'm not going to back down from because of my person, and I'm not going to change like how I say what I say. But what I am going to do is I'm going to try to show you that we are human beings. And so whenever you don't advocate with me, you are showing me that like you're trying to treat me like less than a human being, but I will not allow that for you. I will not grant you that space. You will not pass go. You will not collect $200 on this one. That you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I feel like there's too many people who they want you to sugarcoat it and make it soft, and that's the way you're gonna get more people. But I'd rather say I stood on my principles. I was just. I was fair. I could be kind when I needed to, but I could also be direct when I also needed to. And in that truth telling, I'm also going to treat you like a human being, because for me, I feel like the people who are getting the worst education are white students because they're not getting the same education that we are. Like those of us who come from neighborhoods that are predominantly underserved also are taught resilience, but we're also taught to be proud about our culture. We're also taught to like be better human beings, even in the face of tragedy, even in the face of disaster and negativity, as opposed to so many of my white wealthy students, unfortunately, are taught that they need to dominate over other people, that they need to be in competition, that they need to be better than everybody. They need to be more human than everybody else is human, as opposed to those of us who are aspiring for a real shared humanity. And so, like, I find myself saying, here's what my niche is as I got older is like, I'm still going to say what I need to say, and you're going to hear me. And if you don't like it, great, pay me. But then also like make sure that you understand that like when you hire me, this is what you're hiring me for. And I'm not backing down from that at all.
Yeah. Well, great answer. And so let's talk about now. You're a doctoral candidate.
Yes, sir.
Tell me about that. What's your dissertation research about?
It's actually about us, me. I mean, the way that I've been telling people, I've been calling it the sociology of teachers of color in New York City. So I'm studying how professionalism intersects with race and social context in New York City, trying to understand what that all looks like and how people define professionalism more generally. And of course, that is to say too, I don't just study sociology and education. I also have a policy concentration. So I want to see how that might inform how we move forward with actual policies that recruit and retain teachers of color more generally with race in mind. Of course, this is also going to apply to gender. This is also going to apply to like a sexual orientation, whatever that might look like. But more generally, I want to see if people come up with a whole different definition than what's often been taught to us about what it means to be a professional. And I'm finding some interesting things about how people are meting that out. It's like, for instance, like professionals are supposed to adhere to the curriculum. Black people are like, it's more like we got to find the balance between autonomy and like doing what's right for kids. And we can do all those things at the same time. We can be culture responsive and like it is about the income at the out and the outcome at the same time. You know what I mean? So more long story short, I'm finding out a whole lot of things about what it means to be a really good teacher. And I'm finding them out in a way that people haven't often asked themselves. And everything has to be, oh, we have to do it based on what the research says. Okay, great. Like, let me read all the research. Cool. But y'all haven't thought about this. And my own classroom experience also informs what I'm looking for too. So that's been a blessing to do as well.
Nice. And you're learning all that. You have all of this experience already. What are the next 5 years look like for you? What do you want to do with all of this knowledge and information and experience?
If I'm fortunate, I think there's a couple of things I'd love to do. Number one is to try to build out more teachers who can do the things that I've done so that we can have more people keep doing this. Like legacy really matters to me a lot. And so that's gonna be cool. And of course I get to do that through EduColor, through my own informal and formal mentoring with a number of people, even folks who are perhaps older than me. I'm still like, here's the way that I did it. I gave you the blueprint. All y'all gotta do is follow it, right? And of course, secondly, like change the teaching profession itself. I mean, I think there's something about how teachers have to encounter the school system. But then if you're a teacher of color, for example, you are more likely to run into conflicts from a fiscal standpoint, from a professional standpoint, from an academic standpoint. These things matter. And so for me, this is the way that I try to think about how we're going to do better. Is like, that's what I want to see maybe 5 years down the line.
Nice. I didn't hear you say public office. Is that in the cards for you at any point, you think?
I've heard things and I'm always humbled by it. This whole the model of a reluctant leader is what I aspire to. If I am asked, then okay, like, but if it's something where I can serve in a different capacity, then cool too. I'm with it.
Well, Jose, I whatever it is, I am excited to continue following you on your social channels and seeing what you're doing, and I would love to know, and I'm sure the people listening would love to know, where can they find you? What are the channels, websites, whatever?
I mean, my website, thejosevilson.com, has every sort of like place that you could find me at. I tend to be super duper hyper responsive on Twitter, on Threads, on Instagram. Any of those channels are perfectly fine. I mean, those are my top three right now. And of course, LinkedIn, believe it or not, has been pretty popping as of late as well. So wherever folks want to find me, I'm usually there and really responsive depending on what the request is, of course. But then more than anything, I also want to elevate EduColor, because I think educolor.org, we just recently redesigned the website too. So that's been a blessing. But that's where a lot of the community is. Those are my people. So wherever two or more of us are gathered, we tend to be really dope. So I'm grateful for all that.
Well, Jose, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about this on this episode of Reclaim Personas. I really enjoyed getting to know your story, your identity, and how that's translated into your brand and what you're advocating for. So thank you so much. And yeah, I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for checking out this episode of Reclaimed Personas. If you want more, please subscribe. And remember, keep claiming your space and your story.
My voice is more important than the notion of who I am. Reclaim personas. Reclaim personas.